Okay, gang, well, the good news is after a long process, the GS is back and running and we're back up and riding again. So real quick, I just wanted to tell you guys how this problem went with the dreaded alternator failure on the GS. This is a 2015, and that's indeed what had happened. Was the alternator itself crapped out on me at a little over 30,000 miles. So I just wanted to tell you how long it took to get it fixed, how involved it was, my warranty, service, the dealership repair experience, and the symptoms that led up to it that I knew that I had a major electrical problem. So to start off with, I'm going to try to make this kind of quick, but the symptoms began, I believe what happened was I power washed it, which I do frequently. I power washed it, I got it back to the house, 5-minute ride later, parked it, and that night it was dark. I shut off the bike and I had a puff of smoke come by. And it was kind of dark, so I didn't really know. So that was my first indication that something went wrong. And I looked around, sniffed around. It smelled a little bit maybe like an electrical wire burned or a fuse burned, but I couldn't find anything. So what do you do? So the next day I took it for a pretty long ride, 40-mile ride, and I had no symptoms whatsoever. Then the following day, the third day, I was about 5 miles away from the house, and I got the red triangle, the alert. So I was like, what the heck is that? And then just a few moments later, I got the bat low indication. And so then I cycled through the information system until I saw the voltage, and sure enough, the voltage was dropping out of normally 14.5 volts, somewhere around there, 14.2, 14.5 or so is what I've been used to seeing. It had dropped down to, and it was just dropping from 13 to 12, 11. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it home, and sure enough, I made it home. It was about a 5-6 mile ride back, and by the time I got home, the battery had depleted down to around 11 to maybe 10.8, I can't remember, but it didn't completely die off, and everything worked all the way home. So over the next 2 days, which kind of sucked because I had a little bit of a trip planned, which I kind of had to bail on. So over the next 2 days, I scoured the internet, looked up every YouTube video, all the forums, trying to figure out and diagnose the electrical problem. And I checked all the fuses, and there's one major fuse. It's a 50 amp fuse right under your seat there, which is the main power fuse, I guess. So I was really hoping as a last resort that was the problem. Sure enough, it sure was not. I pulled out the battery, I checked the connections. One of them seemed a little bit loose. I was hopeful that was the repair. No, it was not. I cleaned up the battery. Everything was good to go with that. So what I did is I would charge it up on the house charger, and then I'd go ride it and see if it would hold. Nope, sure enough, I did that about 3 or 4 times, and instantly it was just dropping off. And so I gave it one last shot, and then I cruised down the freeway, and it was holding the charge. And then this is the most peculiar thing of this whole scenario was it was holding the charge, and then it started to drop off. I was about 7 miles away from the house. It slowly dropped off, and then all of a sudden it came back up. So it was like the alternator revived itself for a moment, and I was thinking, oh good, maybe it was one of those loose-ish connections or something. And nope, sure as shit, boom, it just started depleting once again, and then it never came back to life. So I took it to the house, put it on the charger, and well, actually I think I left it off the charger for a day or two. Eventually I ended up putting it on the charger before I took it to the dealer, but those were the symptoms. What else can you really check besides connections, fuses, and your voltage readout? There's not a whole lot you can do to troubleshoot it, actually. So if those are your symptoms, then that may be what the problem is. What else here? I also hooked up my friend's Optimate battery charger / tester, big unit like this, to it to kind of run it through its cycle test, and nope, no indications that the battery itself was at fault. Battery checked out good. Fine. Okay. So those are the symptoms. Now, this is when, so I called the dealership on that following Monday, and the guy looked at the calendar, and he had an opening about two weeks later. And he told me the opening, and so I looked at my calendar. Unfortunately, I was at work, so it was like, oh, that's not going to work for me. What else you got? What do you got next? So then he spit off the next date, which was like a week and a half later. It's like almost 4 weeks later. So I was looking at my calendar. I was like, okay, that'll work for me. Great. So I got myself the appointment. This was early June, about the second week of June is when the appointment was. Actually, it was the 17th of June is when the appointment was going to be. Certainly about almost 3 weeks after I had called and made the appointment. So I got to thinking, and I was like, well, shit, I could just drop the thing off and they can work on it while I'm at work. Let me call back and try to get that earlier appointment. Sure as shit, man, that next day, apparently the appointment, the one and only opening that they had was gone. So there was no way that they were going to be able to get me in, and that appointment would have been a week and a half earlier. Total freaking bummer, dude. If I had thought about it, I'd have had this bike back a week and a half earlier, you know. So I go to work. I finally get the damn bike turned in, dropped off, fully charged, and I drop it off. And service manager, he was super excellent to work with. All the guys, all my experience there at the dealership here in Utah, the BMW shop, pretty good experience overall. Very few exceptions to that. So they take it in, he takes my complaint, and then I leave it with him. He makes the phone call to RPMOne, my extended warranty company, and so he checks with RPMOne, and apparently, let me back up. It took them a day or two to diagnose the problem and verify that it wasn't in fact the battery. Nothing like trying to make a video in the middle of a canyon with Harleys rolling by. What are you going to do? One thing you're going to learn about this channel is that the audio is usually fucked. Whatever. So they spent some time diagnosing it, verified that it wasn't the battery, and that it was in fact the alternator. So it's like, okay, great. That took 2 days or so. So then he contacted RPMOne, and they confirmed that it was covered under the warranty. So that was great. And then it was going to be, I don't know how many hours, but I think their rate's $140 an hour or something. It was whatever, 15 hours worth of work. So it was going to be somewhere around $3,000, between $3,000 and $4,000 for the repair, including the parts, including the alternator itself. So fortunately, they covered it, covered the alternator, they covered their labor, and that was awesome. So out the door, I had them swap out my tires, and those are like $80 a piece, $100, something like that. I got a new battery, and then whatever little bit I had to cover for this repair, I don't remember, but it was about under $400 out the door. So that was a good thing. A huge relief over $4,000 worth of repairs, right? Okay. So by now, about 5 days has gone by, and they determined that the parts that they need are in the United States at one of the other Beamer dealers, and that I didn't have to wait for them to be shipped from Germany. So that was a huge relief. It's probably about a 2 to 3 day labor work man hours, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so supposedly they got started on it, waiting on the parts, and then so they had it since the 17th, and I picked it up probably around the about 11 days later, something like that. And so, good grief, man! You know, this whole freaking problem had this bike down for almost a month in prime riding season too. So it was a major bummer, but whatever, deal with it. During the whole time, I tried to be super understanding of their schedule. You know, there's one BMW service center here in Utah. The next closest one's like in Vegas or maybe Denver. And so it's like, pretty unrealistic to try to get your bike out there for service and then have to go retrieve it again if they'll even work with you and work you in. So you're kind of at their mercy, but you know, try to maintain a good attitude about it and not be upset at them. What can you do? There's 6,000 BMWs that need service in one bay that has 6 freaking lifts in it. One shop that has 6 bays in it. It's like, good grief, what can you do? But they kept me informed pretty well. They did what they could do, and they got it fixed. Okay, so now we get to the point where it's time to go pick it up. So I go to pick it up, and they were a little bit delayed that day of getting it finalized and finished up, but that's fine. I was kind of pushing them, and I showed up earlier. And I was on my way home from Roosevelt, so I had the truck and trailer, and I didn't want to drive all the way, past it and then have to double back 50 miles, double back home, make it a 100-mile trip just to get the damn bike. So I kind of was hanging out at their shop for a bit, pressuring them to finish it up. So they let me take the bike, and the first thing I notice is as soon as I'm driving out of the lot and heading up the road, just when you would just kind of lightly, gently, but firmly get on the throttle and then off, on and off, on and off, there was a clunking happening in the freaking drive shaft is what it felt like. I was like, good grief, please don't tell me they have to pull the entire engine to fix this. So I rode it 2 miles up and down in a parking lot all around. And sure enough, the sound and the clunk was absolutely there. It was not going to go away. So I bring it back. I have the service manager come out. I try to demonstrate it to him in the parking lot. He really can't hear it. I'm trying to explain it to him. And this was the only part that was a little bit concerning with the service center there, was that the service manager, pretty young fella, good dude, really easy to work with in the end. It's just his intent was that, the way he explained it was, RPMOne only wants to have one service ticket open at a time, so what we're going to have to do is close out this repair and then open another repair under this problem. And I was like, whoa, time out, okay. And he said, well, we didn't take it for a test drive when you brought it in. We have no idea if this clunking has been there all along. And I'm like, so I gave him my spiel about, look, man, if it had been clunking before this, I would have brought it in. And I know you have no proof and no evidence that there wasn't a clunk, but all you have to go on is my word. But I'm giving you my word that wasn't there. And I kind of pointed out all the parts where I think it was coming from and told him, man, I'd really like you to not close out this repair, because this, in my opinion, is completely associated with this repair. So we need to get it repaired under this ticket, right? That's what makes sense. So he was reasonable. He's like, okay, yeah, we'll try that. He pushed it back into the shop. The mechanic took it for a ride. The mechanic did some work to it, took it for a ride, pulls it back around, 10 minutes goes by, and I see the mechanic. I'm like, thumbs up, and he's like, is this yours? So I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, I got it fixed. And I was like, oh, thank God. I gave him a fist bump, and I was like, what was it? And he's like, oh, it was just in the drive shaft there's a detent that it wasn't tightened into the detent. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like just now, but they got it fixed. So I took it for another test drive, and sure as shit, the noise was gone. What a friggin' relief, right? What a relief. So, whew, super stoked. I loaded it up, took it home, and now I've had it for about 6 days, not even that. Yeah, 5 or 6 days now. And I got about 400 or 500 miles on it already. No problems, no clunks. Battery works good. I did get a new battery, a new alternator, and the new tires all in that service. So my big hope is that, since this is typically the biggest repair that can be done on these bikes, short of major engine repair, that this is kind of the one and only time that I have to deal with this, and that alternator that's in there lives forever. Apparently, when they switched to this style, maybe the liquid cooled, they made it so that the clutch and whatever is easier to repair, easier to replace without having to split the engine apart. But the alternator you do. Whereas in the older bikes, it was the reverse. Supposedly, is what I gather. Now, reading on the forums, you know, I was pretty worried about it because there were, I don't know, maybe three or four different threads on the different forums that dudes had said that they did in fact have this very problem, and that it was in fact an alternator failure. One guy had, apparently the alternator hardware came out, separated, and gouged up the inside and got major problems going on in there. Thank God mine didn't. I would imagine you would hear some noise, but depending on how deep and buried it is, maybe you wouldn't. So thankfully it didn't tear up anything on the inside, but apparently it does happen. It's rare, very rare. Like I said, 30,000 miles, a freaking alternator should absolutely last 30,000 miles. It should last 200,000 miles, or, you know, somewhere a high number like that. So I'm hopeful that this bike won't have any problems like that, and we're good to go. Now here we are. So here we are. I've got a trip in about a week and a half to Colorado, and lo and behold, my right-hand fork seal, the upper fork seal, stanchion seal, is freaking leaking. So of course I called and tried to see, I left a message to see about getting an appointment in, but I don't think that's probably a warranty recoverable item. Maybe it is, but I don't really think that's even worth my time to dick around with driving it there, waiting, and then driving it home. I suspect that it's just dirt and grime in the stanchions. I don't know why, if this is associated with the repair they did, with having to remove the whole front end or whatever, but it started as soon as I picked it up from their service. So I've done a little bit of research. It looks like it's probably a fairly easy thing to work on. So I suspect I'm gonna pull the stanchion out. Hopefully the seal's not jacked up, and just clean it up, oil it up. Should be good to go, I suspect. More to follow on that. So that's the story. Hopefully your alternator didn't fail, but if it did, this is maybe what the cause was. If it needs a big ass long repair and you're on the road, depending on where those parts are and the availability, good luck, man. You might have to freaking camp out for a month. I'm grateful to RPMOne for covering that. I read a lot of kind of horror stories and Better Business Bureau. There's a whole Better Business Bureau thread on them, but they seem to be pretty responsive to all of the customers' concerns, which every customer concern reply I read seemed pretty reasonable. I don't know, it's questionable. So anyway, that's the story, that's a wrap. She's up and running. Hopefully I can take her on this freaking Colorado trip and the forks don't blow out, or that I can get it fixed up, but that's the story. So we'll see you on the next one. Yeah, apparently they have to separate. I mean, this is just the front cover, but they have to separate the engine case from the frame. So pretty much everything comes apart, as far as I understand, starting with taking everything off of the tank and above. So pretty involved service. Good grief. Yeah, the stanchions. The leaky stanchion seal right there. Pretty good leak. It was supposed to be a idyllic place to do a video, but not with traffic on a Sunday. There she is, Donna, you freaking beast. Sick.